The Haunting of Maplewood Mansion. It was a chilly autumn evening when a group of four friends, Alex, Sarah, Mark, and Emma, decided to visit the infamous Maplewood Mansion. The mansion had stood abandoned for nearly 50 years, its grand structure slowly being consumed by nature. No one in the small town dared to come close to it anymore. Whispers of strange happenings, voices in the walls, and flickering lights could be heard, but none dared to go inside until now. The old wrought iron gates creaked as Alex pushed them open. The mansion loomed ahead, shrouded in mist. Its windows were dark, and the front door hummed ajar as if inviting them in. There was an unsettling stillness about the place. The air smelled of decay and dampness, and the once grand garden was now overrun with weeds and twisted vines. "Are we really doing this?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking slightly. "We've come this far," Mark replied, flashing a nervous grin. They all hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The wooden floorboards groaned beneath their weight as they entered the grand hallway. The walls were lined with portraits of long-dead ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow the group as they made their way deeper into the house. The house was dark, the only light coming from the flashlights they held. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, as if something or someone was watching them. They passed a large staircase that spiraled upwards into the darkness. "Let's check upstairs first," Emma suggested. "Maybe we'll find something interesting." With a collective sigh, they ascended the staircase. The walls were covered in cracked wallpaper, and the floor was littered with broken glass. As they reached the second floor, a cold draft rushed past them, sending shivers down their spines. A faint whisper seemed to drift through the air, but when they looked around, they saw nothing. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, clutching onto Alex's arm. "Probably just the wind," Alex said, though even he wasn't convinced. They ventured further down the hallway, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. Suddenly, a door at the far end of the hallway creaked open on its own. "What the hell?" Mark muttered, his heart racing. The door led into a large room, once a study, but now filled with broken furniture and shattered glass. A large fireplace stood at one end, though no fire had been lit in decades. Dust hung in the air like a heavy fog. As they entered the room, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. They spun around in shock. "Who shut the door?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. No one had touched the door. No one had even been near it. Suddenly, they heard it, a soft whisper. At first, it was too faint to understand, but then it became clearer, like someone breathing in their ears. Sarah's face went pale as she stepped back, her flashlight flickering. "What is that?" she asked, pointing to a shadow that seemed to move across the room, though there was no light source for it. The shadow grew larger, taking the form of a dark figure. A man or something that once was a man emerged from the corner, its eyes hollow and empty, its skin pale and decayed. Its mouth stretched into a twisted grin as it took a step forward. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly lifted its arm, pointing to the far corner of the room. The group turned to see a small door, one they hadn't noticed before. It was covered in strange markings. The figure seemed to beckon them toward it. "We need to get out now," Alex said, his voice shaking, but as they turned to flee, the walls seemed to close in. The hallway stretched endlessly, and doors that once led to exits were now blocked by shifting shadows. The air grew thick with an oppressive force. "We have to go through the door," Emma said, her voice filled with terror. They rushed to the small door, and to their surprise it opened easily. On the other side was a narrow staircase leading down into a pitch-black basement. "No way," Mark said, backing away. "There's something down there, I can feel it." But Sarah, trembling, insisted, "We have no choice, it's the only way out." As they descended, the temperature plummeted, the walls were damp, and the floor slick like oil. Suddenly the flashlight flickered out, and they were plunged into complete darkness. The whispering began again, louder and more frantic. "You shouldn't have come." The walls pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, and a low growl came from the shadows. They turned, but there was nowhere to run. The door behind them slammed shut, trapping them in the dark with whatever else lurked in the basement. And then, just as quickly as it started, everything went silent. The creature's shadow grew larger, crawling toward them with unnatural movements. Sarah's flashlight flickered as it advanced. Her heart raced. The figure's hollow eyes locked onto hers, unblinking. Mark reached out to grab her arm, but she recoiled in terror. The thing stopped, its twisted smile widening. It raised a bony finger, pointing toward a small, rusted door hidden in the corner, covered with strange symbols. Sarah's voice trembled as she whispered, "What is that?" "We have no choice," Alex replied urgently. "We need to get out." With heavy hearts, the group approached the door, the air around them thick with dread. The shadows seemed to move on their own, creeping along the walls like living creatures. Alex touched the door. A cold wind blew through the room, extinguishing their flashlights. The temperature dropped sharply. They could feel it, the presence of something dark, watching them as they stepped closer to the cursed door. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward into pitch blackness. "No way," Mark muttered, backing away. "There's something down there." But Sarah, determined, insisted, "We have to." Slowly, they descended, their flashlights flickering and dimming. The air became colder with each step, a heavy presence filling the space around them. The silence was deafening, but they could sense that something was lurking, waiting for them. The deeper they went, the thicker the air became, suffocating them. The walls closed in, the temperature plummeted. A faint scratching echoed from the darkness, followed by a low growl that grew louder with each passing second. "What is that?" Emma whispered, her voice shaking. The scratching came closer, then a figure emerged from the shadows, its movements jerky, its body twisted and skeletal. Mark's heart raced. "It's coming for us," he muttered. Without warning, the ground trembled beneath them, and the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut with a deafening bang. The darkness consumed them. Their flashlights went out, leaving them in complete blackness. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. They could feel the figure's presence moving closer. A cold hand brushed against Sarah's arm, sending a shock of ice through her veins. The figure stepped closer, its hollow eyes glowing in the darkness. The creature's breath echoed in the stillness, cold and wet, like the sound of something dying. Emma gasped, her voice lost in the suffocating silence. The thing's eyes glowed faintly, a sickly, unnatural light that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Its lips curled into a grin, exposing jagged, broken teeth. It reached out, its long fingers brushing against the air as if testing its prey. Sarah stepped back, but the creature was too fast, blocking their only path. With nowhere to run, the group stood frozen. The air grew thick with an oppressive force, pushing them closer together. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, and the floor beneath them felt like it was shifting. The scratching sound intensified, now joined by low, guttural growls, each one sending chills down their spines. The creature's skeletal hand reached forward, its bony fingers scraping against the stone floor. "We need to move now," Alex whispered, but his voice trembled with fear. As if hearing Alex's words, the creature lunged forward with terrifying speed, its mouth opening wide. The smell of decay filled the air as it let out a blood-curdling screech. Mark grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward the narrow staircase. But it was too late. The creature was upon them. Its hand wrapped around Sarah's ankle, pulling her toward the shadows. She screamed, her voice filled with pure terror, but her cries were drowned by the creature's ghastly howl. With a surge of adrenaline, Alex and Emma pulled Sarah free, their combined strength forcing her to break free from the creature's grasp. But the thing wasn't done. It rose, its broken form towering over them as it reached for the group. They stumbled backward, falling onto the stairs. The shadowed figure advanced, its empty eyes never blinking, its jaw unhinging as if to swallow them whole. The sound of its grotesque laughter echoed, bouncing off the walls of the basement. In a desperate attempt, Emma pushed through the fear, her heart pounding. "We have to go now," she screamed. They scrambled up the stairs, the cold breath of the creature close behind them. Each step felt like an eternity, and the scratching continued, following them. The walls seemed to close in, the narrow staircase growing tighter. The creature's growl reverberated, and they could feel its presence inching closer. Just as they reached the top of the stairs, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The growling shook the walls. A shadow passed over the door, claws scraping against it. Sarah screamed, but the door wouldn't budge. The thing was close, its icy breath on their necks. "It's here," Mark whispered. Suddenly, the door splintered, and the creature's ghastly face appeared, its eyes glowing in the dark. They bolted down the hallway, the creature's footsteps thundering behind them. Their feet slipped as they ran, but they couldn't stop. The creature was relentless. Emma turned, but the shadow was gone. Then a voice whispered, "You can't escape." The hallway stretched endlessly, the walls pulsing as if alive, trapping them in a nightmare they couldn't wake from.